What's going on, Packers fans? Aaron Nagler here, joined by Paul Bretl from the Packers Wire and various other outlets that you can find him on. Paul, how you doing today?
I'm excellent, Aaron. Happy to be here with you talking Packers. The draft is slowly getting here,
Let's
very slowly.
go. 10. We got 10 days. 10 days. Oh my God. I can't handle it. It's too long, but I did peruse my Twitter feed the other day and found an article of yours that I really wanted to talk to you about because I thought, A, it's draft related, obviously, but
Mhm.
B, it's like I thought it did a really good job of kind of diving into some of the more niche areas, let's say, as far as the positions that we have all been talking about for months now when it comes to
Mhm.
the draft. But there's some positions that probably haven't been talked about quite as
Yes.
much on the offensive side, especially. You look at the way the Packers finished last year, uh, basically on a tear on the offensive side of the ball. I think, there's a maybe not a tendency, but there's maybe a danger of saying, oh, they're fine. They're set
Mhm.
there, especially considering how young they were. But you and I both know that is not the case. There's certainly, something to be talked about at each and every position, which you did for this article, which I wanted to let people know you can find in the description of this video. There'll be a link right there. You can go read it over at the Packers Wire and appreciate you taking some time to talk about it. And of course, I'm going to start with the pretty boy position because we got to start with the quarterbacks always, always. And it feels like, again, like, why would you talk about quarterbacks? The Packers are set with Jordan Love. They'll undoubtedly be signing him to an extension. But you made the case here, and I think rightly so. You having heard from Goody earlier this offseason,
Mhm.
do you think the Packers add a quarterback in this draft?
I absolutely do. And to kind of set the table for all this, they have 11 picks. They have five in the
Right.
top 100. Goody has so much flexibility when you have that many picks because, say, at pick 41, they go with a position that's maybe not viewed as, an absolute need right now.
Right.
Well, he still has three others in the top 100, another nine after that to eventually address those bigger positional needs. So I think that he has a flexibility to do whatever he wants. And with the quarterback position, he was very direct about that earlier this offseason, saying he wants to get back to drafting that position. And I wrote about it in its own article a few weeks back. I don't really think that has anything to do with, all right, we have to find an upgrade over Sean Clifford in that backup role. But like Gutekunst said, this is something he's wanted to get back to. We know that this is an organizational philosophy that the Packers have constantly evaluating, looking at churning the back end of the roster at that quarterback position. And we've seen them do that over the years. 2021 was Kurt Benkert. 2022 is Danny Etling. Last year was Alex Magoo. They are always churning that third spot on the depth chart at the quarterback position, looking for upgrades. And one difference between those three versus going into the draft is they'd have the opportunity to bring in someone and develop, which is what
Right.
Gutekunst really emphasized that he wanted to do. So 6 picks on day 3 of the draft. Gutekunst being as direct as he was and how he wants to tackle that position. Right now, in the article, I phrased it as a question, but I'm almost expecting them to go that route. And again, if at the end of the day that person, that quarterback they bring in, ends up pushing Sean Clifford for that quarterback 2 role, that's fantastic. But I don't think that's the ultimate goal. At the end of the day, it's to have that developmental prospect on the roster at the most important position in football.
And that's the thing. How many guys did we see miss time last year as far as
Mm-hmm.
starters across the league, right? And to your point, I think there's zero doubt that they love Sean Clifford. I don't think you can go and find any quote from anybody in that building where they haven't raved about him, from his work in training camp to what he did in the preseason to everything and how involved and, in tune he was during the season. I think they really like him. But to your point, I think they want to breed competition everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And it is interesting because you mentioned the back end guys, like the third stringers that they have kind of churned, right? It's funny to me though that Goody acknowledges this publicly as far as, this is something he wants to get back to. I think he recognizes, like, so far in his tenure, and then certainly during Ted's tenure, they didn't do a lot of this. Like, they kind of operated almost opposite the way that Ron Wolf did. When you remember when Favre was there. I mean, the Iron Man of the sport. They were still drafting guys. They
Mm-hmm.
were still bringing in the, Matt Hasselbeck's, Aaron Brooks of the world, and then ending up, flipping them. And I don't think it's necessarily that's like the idea, the long term
Right.
goal to flip these guys, although that may be a nice byproduct. But I do think it's about competition, and I do think, especially when you look at what that did for their roster last year. at wide receiver, at tight end, whatever. These young guys are pushing each other. And I think you saw the results on the field last year.
Yeah, and to your point about backup quarterbacks, sometimes third string quarterbacks seeing action, there were 50 quarterbacks last season that took at least one NFL snap.
That's
Now,
what I'm
obviously, some
saying.
of that is on teams who weren't getting out of what they wanted out of their starter, but a lot of that's injuries as well. 50 quarterbacks took a snap last year.
That's great. That's a lot of freaking quarterbacks. Going back into the backfield here on offense, is running back 2 on the roster? I think that's an excellent question because I think most folks would see the re-signing of A.J. Dillon as, okay, we're set at running back. I think most people probably expect them to draft someone at this position, but yeah, I don't know that it's an automatic lock that A.J.'s your kind of main rotational piece behind Jacobs.
Yeah, I think we can look at AJ Dillon's contract, which from a cap perspective, it's a league minimum deal. If the Packers want to get out of it, if they decide to release him and not put him on the 53-man roster, I think they're out 65,000 in dead cap. Like it's on the NFL level, it's nothing. So he is far from a roster lock. I think there's absolutely value in bringing him back, obviously without Aaron Jones, but just someone who's has experience, knows the offense. And we have to remember with that running back position, Matt LaFleur says this all the time. How do you contribute in pass protection? How do you do as a pass catcher? It's not just about being a ball carrier. And while I know they need more juice in that running back 2 role, Dillon's proved to be a reliable pass catcher. He's proved to be solid in pass protection. It's those other areas that really help solidify the decision in bringing him back for this upcoming season. But again, he's not a roster lock by any means. We can all look at Emmanuel Wilson. Super small sample size. What we saw from him was exciting. But if you're Brian Gutekunst, you're a general manager, you're not operating under the assumption that, oh, he'll just take a step forward in year 2. You can't bank on that.
Yeah.
And so you have 2 guys who you really right now can't say with certainty are going to be on your team, let alone, oh, that's going to be running back 2 behind Josh Jacobs. So sticking with the theme of competition, I absolutely expect them to go out and add someone in the draft, potentially even on day 2, again, because they do have 5 selections. And as we're looking at the running back position, evaluating who would be a good fit for them, remember, what's their pass catching experience out of the backfield? Do they have experience lining up in the slot? How have they held up in pass protection? Those are those other factors outside of how many carries did they have? What was their yards per carry that are going to be important evaluation factors for the Packers?
Do you have a draft crush in mind at the running back spot? It feels like everybody has like a guy that they really like.
Yeah, it's on day 3. I do like Will Shipley from Clemson. I like what he brings as a pass catcher. I really like having that element out of the backfield, and Josh Jacobs brings that up as well. But when he's not on the field and you have Will Shipley out there, you're not this one-dimensional offense still. He had 104 targets during his time at Clemson, really, really good in space. So in terms of a day 3 option, maybe flying under the radar a little bit, that's someone that I like.
I love it. And I'm glad you mentioned Jacobs being able to catch the ball because it seems like Matt LaFleur is jonesing to get him involved in the passing game. He can't go in availability without talking about like how he wants to he thinks Jacobs can be a weapon in the passing game. Next thing you mentioned, and this is funny because this is something that I had talked with Billy about on Carry the G Radio regarding it being somewhat of a sneaky draft need is the H-back position. And I'm curious to find out where they land as far as, and you kind of touch on this in your article, like, is this a priority? Is this something that they absolutely have to have in Matt's offense? Because if it is, I got to suspect there's a good chance they're looking hard at that position on day 2, which I think most people would be surprised at, but it wouldn't surprise me if, an H-back on the night of the draft or day of the draft, you'll hear it announced as a tight end. And I think that would surprise a lot of Packers fans.
Yeah, and I phrased it as a question because by season end, and I think in part of it was what we were seeing on the field, but Josiah DeGuara was getting, I think it was 12, 13, 14 snaps a game. Like it wasn't this massive role by any means, but going back to when Matt LaFleur was first hired, or even when they first drafted Josiah DeGuara, it was he's going to fill this, important H-back role that provides the versatility for the offense. When Matt LaFleur first was hired, we heard him use the phrase, the illusion of complexity. In short, being able to run a variety of plays from just a few formations, building off concepts from earlier in the game later on. So plays that look similarly, but end up quite different. And in order to execute on that, you need versatility. And that's where the H-back comes in. They can impact the game as a blocker, as a pass catcher. You can move them around the formation to create mismatches, not only for themselves, but with the attention they can draw, the mismatches they can create, that creates mismatches for the others to exploit as well. So again, Josiah DeGuara's role is pretty small by the end of the season, but that role in terms of what Matt LaFleur wants to do, we see Kyle Shanahan with Kyle Juszczyk out in San Francisco and how he utilizes him. Like, you can look at that being a big need that the Packers have to fill. In terms of on the roster, they have Henry Pearson. He was undrafted last year at Appalachian State, who would fill that role. I do wonder, I've pontificated on this, could Tyler Davis be given the opportunity this summer to earn snaps in that capacity? Athletic tight end. His primary experience with the Packers has been as a blocker. Or do they look to the draft? I mean, Ben Sinnott from Kansas State is, Josiah DeGuara,
2.0.
2.0, yes, and brings a ton of more juice, athleticism to that position. Really good blocker, really good pass catcher. Mentioned his athleticism, but again, in filling that specific role, it is something that's open or up in the air right now on the Packers roster.
Well, it's funny you mentioned how little DeGuara got used down the stretch, right? And they had certainly found a kind of way of working, but you're always looking forward, right? Matt has talked about this pretty much every summer as far as tweaks to the offense and trying to do different things. And you do have to wonder if some of that was by design because of the fact that, look, we've got all these talented weapons, and why are we going to be, drawing up stuff that's H-back dependent, which probably takes one of those weapons off the field and brings on Josiah DeGuara with, Godspeed in Jacksonville. But it was certainly obvious it was time to move on and hopefully raise that floor a little bit. Speaking of pass catchers, will the wide receiver depth in this draft be too good to pass up? Oh, Paul, you're touching the third rail there. I mean, look, you can't deny that each and every year, it seems, for the past 3 or 4 years, there's been an incredibly talented wide receiver class on offer in the draft. And, Ted Thompson made no bones about it. He drafted wide receivers early, often, plenty of them throughout his tenure. But that was for an offense under Mike McCarthy that ran a lot of 4, even 5 wide receiver sets. I'm fascinated to see if this comes to fruition, because it wouldn't surprise me if the value is there, right? If there's a guy who they have rated as a blue chip prospect, or even just highly rated comparative to everybody else remaining on the board, with those picks you got, that ammunition, I think it's entirely possible they take a swing here.
Yeah, we look at the number of picks, like you mentioned, and just how Gutekunst approaches the draft with, all right, who's the best player available? Like, chances are one of those picks, it's going to be a wide receiver. I think on PFF's big board, I think 22 or 23 of their top 100 players are wide receivers, like just an absurd amount.
Yeah, Matt Miller had 8 wide receivers going in the first round.
Yes.
What?
And again, we know the depth, we know the talent at this position group, so certainly not in need by any means. But I loved Brian Gutekunst's quote. I think it was at the NFL owners meeting I think Ted Thompson said as well. We don't know what our needs are going to be in 6 months, and so that's we have to put ourselves as best we can this time of the year in Gutekunst's shoes and the Packers' shoes. Like, that's the mindset behind this. And so yes, seeing 6 wide receivers who all bring something different to the table, super talented room. Potentially, with the depth of this draft, they could look to add to it. And if they're going to, the specific role that I think could be valuable for them to try to fill is a second vertical presence. Christian Watson has dealt with his injury issues. I know they're looking hard this offseason at what the root of those hamstring issues are to keep him on the field. But, I mean, Jaden Reed said it best last year, how defenses defend that offense is different when he's on the field. And again, not that you're going to go find another Christian Watson with his size and his speed. We need to put that out there. But having that presence that can be on the field if he's not available, or pairing them both together, it changes the way defenses defense. Early on in the season, before the Packers were really able to get going, and even during the 2022 season when they were struggling with Aaron Rodgers, in that first half of the year, they didn't have the deep ball presence. So what does that do? The defenses play closer to the line of scrimmage. It shrinks the field. It's harder to move the ball over the middle, underneath routes in the run game. Makes everything more difficult. Where on the flip side, if that's an element that defenses have to respect, they're playing off. There's more room to operate. And go look at some Romeo Dobbs catches and touchdowns. On a few of them, it is because of the gravity that Christian Watson has, where he's pulling defenders in his direction, which creates spacing and opportunity for others. And like I said, Christian Watson is Christian Watson. You're not just going to go find one of them in any draft class, but having that presence, if he's not available, I think is valuable. Now, having said that, what I'll also add is that player has to be able to contribute in some other capacity as well.
That's the key, right?
All the talent, all the depth on this group, having just a primary vertical presence as your secondary vertical presence, like their roster's too loaded for that. So that may be the calling card, but they got to find a way to contribute in some other fashion.
Yeah, they'd have to make noise right away on teams, no question about it, like out the gate in training camp. Then you ask, and I think this is kind of the hot button topic here throughout the last month or so. The Packers take offensive tackle in the first round. I think it feels like a foregone conclusion at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously, it really depends on how the board falls, but given the depth at that position and how much talent is on offer, I'll be surprised if one of these guys does not make it down to the Packers at 25. And if you're Brian Gutekunst, I know Rasheed Walker played really well down the stretch last year, and I know you got Zach Tom, but who knows? Maybe they're moving him to center. We will find out. But if you've got the chance to get an elite prospect at that position, which is incredibly important, one of the premier positions in the league, I think it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you. And again, putting ourselves in Brian Gutekunst's shoes, like Matt LaFleur and both Adam Stenavich have been very clear when talking about Rasheed Walker, that both saying he has a ways to go. And I think the big thing with him is just consistency. Now, again, we can, peel back the coaching speak a little bit where they're not necessarily going to, just rave about him. But, Rasheed Walker is right now, he's the favorite to, of course, be starting week one, but I don't expect whatsoever he's just going to be handed that job. In some capacity, he's going to have to earn it this summer. That's my expectation. And when we look at how the roster is currently constructed, you hope Luke Tenuta could provide that. You hope Caleb Jones could provide that. They're both on the Yash Nyman developmental path right now. Late round pick or undrafted in Caleb Jones' case, just like Nyman was. Nyman had a year on the practice squad, a year on the 53, and then in his third season, because of injuries, I think it was Billy Turner, started to see some snaps that year. So both of those guys, Jones and Tenuta, are entering their third season. So you hope one of them at least could provide that competition, or one of them can be that swing tackle off the bench if an injury pops up. But again, combined, they have 7 career NFL snaps. Tenuta's coming off an injury that sidelined him for most of last season. If you're Brian Gutekunst, he's probably not going into the summer with the expectation that one of them becomes that guy. He's going to be proactive. He's going to bring in someone else to provide that competition, to provide that depth at that position. And like you said, right now, the way how we know the Packers go about the draft, where the strength of this class is at offensive tackle, it just feels like as we're getting closer, that's where the stars are aligning, where that first pick is going to go.
And we say that and watch them take a running back.
Yes.
Sticking along the offensive line, your final point is also along the front, and it's interesting because you question, the question is, will they take 3 interior linemen at some point during this draft? And I think, given the fact that they didn't draft an offensive lineman at all last season for the first time in forever, it feels like there's a good possibility that they do load up at the position. And I'm always kind of cautious about saying, oh, they have nothing there, because you just mentioned a couple guys who they clearly have brought along. It's always funny to see people be completely dismissive of what's already on hand just because we haven't seen it, and there's no doubt, like, we want to move on from the Royce Newmans of the world because we've watched him plenty and we know what he has, and it's probably not up to snuff. So there's a good chance they kind of, restock, so to speak, I think, along the offensive line. But I always kind of sound a note of caution simply because we don't know what they think they have with a lot of the guys on the roster that maybe we haven't seen from day to day.
Yes, well said. And I got to the number 3 because, to me, obviously could be very wrong, but I feel like 2 interior linemen is a foregone conclusion, especially with 11 picks.
I'm with you.
Because we look at the construction of that roster right now. It's Elton Jenkins, Josh Myers, Sean Ryan, and Royce Newman. Like, that's it. Competition along the offensive line was one of the cornerstones to that unit's play during the second half of the season. Whether you ask LaFleur, Stenavich, Luke Butkus, they all point to that competition, that rotation at left left tackle and right guard last season, is helping to elevate the play of the entire unit. And right now, there's really no competition, along the interior offensive line. Josh Myers, I'm going to guess they would want someone like last summer to potentially at least be there to maybe push him to add to that competition. And outside of Zach Tom and Elton Jenkins, who are starters, like they don't have a backup center option on the roster right now.
Right.
Sean Ryan, I think, is in a similar position as Rasheed Walker. Is he the preferred starter week 1 right now? Yeah. Given how the roster's shaking out, is he going to be handed that job? I don't think so. The big thing with Sean Ryan, and Adam Stenavich has harped on this, especially towards the end of last season, has to get more consistent in pass protection if he's going to be a regular starter at the guard position. And this is also the last year of Josh Myers in his rookie deal. Now, and just a quick tangent on Josh Myers, because I know his play on the field. He
hot button topic, man. Hot button topic.
But what the Packers really like about him is, one, the leadership aspect. Adam Stenavich talked about how last season within that offensive line room, he stepped into that larger leadership role. The other thing that he brings is his ability pre-snap with the communication, especially with blitzes, getting everyone on the same page, identifying who the blitzers are, making sure everyone knows what their blocking responsibilities are. Like, those are the aspects of the game we don't always see take place or unfold on Sundays, but those are 2 areas that the Packers have, I believe that they're really high on him on. And of course, that's an important aspect of this, especially with how often the Packers were blitzed last season. But that interior offensive line, at a minimum, needs some depth, needs some competition. And like I said, I think for sure they're going to add 2 interior linemen. I wouldn't be surprised if they go with 3.
Absolutely love it. Good stuff as always, Paul. I really appreciate the time. Don't be a stranger. I think you haven't been on Cheesehead TV in like a year, 2 years, something like we're gonna fix that. We're gonna have you back a lot more because this is great stuff. Thanks so much for the time, man.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. I really appreciate it.